I am so grateful to welcome my guest, Jason Denham from Awaken Shadow Recovery Coach. Is that the title of your coaching business? Awaken Shadow Coach or Awaken Shadow?
It's a Awaken Shadow Coaching.
All right. Welcome to Stories from the Field, Jason.
Thanks for having me, Will.
Well, you've worked in the outdoor space for a very long time. You've worked in wilderness therapy and residential settings with boys and young men and other genders. What patterns have you seen in how time in the outdoors impacts their emotional growth and resilience? Because basically, this season, I'm really focusing on men and boys.
Okay. So the patterns that I've seen for men and boys over my time in all of these different areas of wilderness therapy and residential treatment, therapeutic boarding, and foster care are these similar types of ways of being. I think that boys and men tend to be about justice quite a lot, whereas those that are of more of the sacred feminine persuasion might be more about relationships. I think that we see lots of men and boys looking for ways to compete with one another. And in some cases, they're looking for a goal to achieve. And it can be something as simple as sitting down and trying to hit that tree over there with these stones that we've got right next to us. And I've noticed that those are some of the ways that we can really grease the wheels on getting young boys and even men, some of the people that I've worked with, to talk a little bit more, to open up. And today it seems as though it's been somewhat more challenging for young boys and men to open up and to talk. So I think that going in that route of kind of meeting them where they are, and being able to come up with little ways to connect that might seem trivial, like a little game like that, can really help. So I've spent a lot of time looking for things that are just right next to me that I can use to grease those wheels, to open up that lines of communication with them.
Well, let's go a little bit more into your background because you're not like a clinician, a mental health
Mhm.
professional. You provide coaching. You've worked at a lot of different places. When I was doing research on you, you've worked at 360 Transitions and Adventure Recovery
Mhm.
and also Awaken Shadow, which obviously is focused on connecting with what I'm read on the website, your shadow self. So tell us a little bit about your different jobs and the different journey that you went into to start the Awakened Shadow.
Okay. So in order to do that, we'll have to go back a little bit.
Way
So
back, way
way
back.
back in the way back machine. So Awakened Shadow is a little inside baseball. It's Jungian, and the talking about the shadow self and then having this awakening. And where my journey started was coming out of college. I was a graphic designer by what it says on my degree, and I wasn't really terrific at that. What I had been doing while I was in college was turning what was a minoring in partying to a major in partying, and it got away from me. So as I was working in Maryland and trying to find my way, I was increasingly getting further into alcohol addiction. And as a geographic cure, I found my way to Asheville, North Carolina, where I started working in wilderness therapy in an attempt to heal thyself by helping others. Usually not the way to go, but one that seems to be normal. And through that time of trying to work with others and to be a better man, I discovered that I was going to need to leave alcohol behind. And in doing so, I found myself in the 12 steps. And in working those 12 steps, there's some influence there from Carl Jung. There's that kind of sent me down a rabbit hole or two to look into symbols and the meanings and so on. And as I'd been trying to strive for excellence and be a better field guide and later mentor and then coach, it just seemed right to move into this idea of awakening, to the shadow self. And could I help other people to do that in various ways? One of which would be through the recovery scene, and how I ended up with Adventure Recovery, that likes to try to strive to be the Knowles of mental health, if you will. So Adventure Recovery takes people out into the wilderness, and we let the wilderness do a lot of its work, similar to where I started in my career.
And
And
just to
and I
give a shout out, they actually sponsored a whole season on this podcast.
amazing, of
Yeah,
course.
they did a great job. Tim Walsh and Josh Flaherty, great leaders of that organization, and really started in the recovery space, and now they're expanding to the
Mhm.
mental health space. Just let's put a little context into the years that you were. When did you get into recovery? And so people can put a year or a time into this story.
Well, okay, as recovery is never really a straight line.
Well,
Here's
you
how
don't
it
have to give
goes.
the dates on that, but in terms of your journey, you worked in wilderness therapy in Asheville,
Yeah.
North Carolina area. In what years? And then,
Okay, so in 2006 is when I started working in wilderness therapy. And then through that time, I spent a year or more in each of the positions that I held while I was there. One of which was also a group home for folks with mild retardation and developmental disabilities. And during that time is when I started to engage with 12-step programming and working on me, but quickly had a series of relapses. I like to joke that I was a part-time drunk because I was working shift work, and usually when I went to work, I was safe there. It was okay. I could heal alongside the people that I was helping to heal. So that took place over the next maybe about 8 years of me working on sobriety and having some struggles and some failures. And it was while I was in working a program in 2014, 2015 into 2015 that I finally found long-term continuous sobriety. So I'm at 10 and a half years at this point.
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been such an incredibly important piece to who I've become as a coach, as an instructor, as a manager, all of the above. And I think that some of us have to look into darkness. Some of us have to do a cannonball into darkness in order to understand it and to come out of it, emerging from that very shadow that we may be ignoring, but it is right over here, just outside the periphery.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Carl Jung wrote about that, and there were archetypes, and so you got into that narrative, Jungian psychology, and adopted some 12 stuff. Started to do some work at Adventure Recovery. And when did you leave the classic form of wilderness therapy when you went out in the field 7 days on, 7 days off?
So I ended up leaving wilderness therapy in 2007 to go work in the group homes. And I think that really helped my skill set with learning how to meet people where they are and chunk down what might seem like pretty simple tasks into even more simplistic tasks so that people could experience some success. And when I left that job, I went back to wilderness again, but it was a therapeutic boarding school in Black Mountain that had a wilderness aspect. So I would work on the weekends in wilderness, and I did that for 3 years.
That's Stone
I
Mountain School, is that right?
at Stone Mountain School, yeah,
Huh. And that program doesn't exist anymore.
not
And
any longer.
no,
Yeah,
and where did you work in wilderness, or did you do other programs?
that was at Sioux, the Carolinas.
Another one.
Yep, just a hop, skip, and a jump from Old Fort to, well, I guess it's still
Yeah,
technically Old Fort.
yeah. And so you end up after that. When did you work in group homes, young adult transitions? When did you team up with the Adventure Recovery folks and
That was a lot
360
further on.
transition? Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So after if I could go, I'll just go sequentially. After being with Black Mountain, I'm sorry, I almost said two things at once. So after leaving Stone Mountain School, I actually hiked the Continental Divide for a time and was getting some space from being in some pretty high pressure environments, doing some healing there. And I returned not to Stone Mountain School because of its closing, but then I went to Black Mountain Home for Children, Youth, and Families, and that was working with foster care. So I was essentially a single parent in a household with 6 boys at a time who were about to age out of the program. And so we were in fast forward mode on how is it that one can become a good man with not a lot of good examples. So I probably had 17 boys come through there during my time. And that's where attachment started to come into play. There were more people who were embracing the attachment theory and bringing that to the forefront, which was a little mystifying at first with the strict boundaries that come with wilderness. And now those are some of the kiddos that we're allowed. I'm allowed to be a part of their life, like go to their baby showers and their weddings and things of that nature. So that was really neat. It helped to formulate some of the relational aspect that now is a part of Awakened Shadow Coaching. And after leaving there, I worked with an all-girls program at Solstice East for a year and saw a really different side of things after working so closely with boys for such a long time. Then coming into an all-girl campus and a almost like 98% female-run campus. It was a real flip from the differences between the usual male-dominated wilderness therapy. And it was me and 3 other guys that were working there. So it was a real eye-opener to the differences that we experience. And I feel like a really valuable way for me to grow. Once I left there, then I started working in the transitional programs. I helped to open foundations out of the Academy at Trails. And then it was time for a change, and I moved to Boston and got into sober living for a little while. So managing men who were coming out of the prison system, helping them to get connected to services, and then also to help them strategize on how it was that they were going to stay sober. And in that time, I decided to learn to become a yoga teacher and meditation facilitator, and added that to the Awakened Shadow, kind of an insignia that was still not quite yet born. But that ended up becoming the more mindful somatics portion of my practice. That led to another opportunity to be in transitional living, working with Passia Life. And that was managing 4 houses with kids that were at the collegiate level who were experiencing that failure to launch. So it was about teaching life skills and trying to relate big emotions to shut down, and how do we overcome this? How do we build our resilience? That was about the time that I left Passia was when I started my own business. It started at first called Grateful Moves. And through the pandemic, I was teaching yoga and meditation and working with people in recovery who were disconnected from things like 12-step groups when we couldn't go in person. So we turned our little 250 square foot studio apartment into a yoga studio, got rid of our bed, and had to roll up a mattress, my wife and I, tuck it off camera so I could teach from in there. And every now and again, you'd see her elbow sneak onto the camera while she was trying to do her job. So that was a really interesting experience. It got me into the techie stuff that we do now. And when it was time to move on from Boston, I found 360 Transitions without any idea that it was out there. An old friend from Solstice actually told me about it, and I interviewed. It's something that I was really excited to be a part of as a parent coach, because I've been working with the kiddos for I guess about 13 years, living in various capacities. And I found myself saying, if I could just talk to these parents, I'd love to be a part of that process of bringing them back together. And that's exactly what 360 Transition does as a wraparound program. Beth Laughlin is really talented at bringing people together in this format of a parent coach working with the parents and a mentor working with the kiddos who are returning, so that we're not sitting in that traditional kind of like tribunal council that feels against the kiddo, like we're all on this team. And instead, we're actually helping the returning kids to advocate for themselves. And while I communicate with the mentor, I can then talk with the parents about holding more space for your kids, allow them to talk this whole thing through. Let's not squash what it is that they're trying to do by be a part of this family dynamic. It's been just a terrific honor to be a part of that process and the challenges that come with it. So that's how I ended up transforming from Grateful Moves into Awakened Shadow so that I could predominantly coach and then become a part of 360. And while I was doing that, I also joined up with Adventure Recovery. So now I've got that bit of a trifecta going on
Hmm.
there.
Yeah. Some people talk about Kevin Bacon being in a lot of movies. You're like the Kevin Bacon of the treatment world for young people and their families. And you ended up moving from Boston to
Colorado. We ended up coming out here to stay with my wife's great uncle in Crestone, which is a spiritual hub and a vortex, kind of like Asheville is. And there are lots of people who come there to open up Buddhist communities and ashrams. There's, I think, 12 or 13 that are in there. So her uncle
really.
said, "Do you want to come out and stay?" And we had just been sitting in our little tiny studio. And I said, "We got to get out of here. I want to go to big open spaces where people look you in the eye and shake your hand." And I was like, "We don't need much, like a yurt and a wood stove. We'll do something like that." And my wife was like, "What's a yurt?" And all of a sudden, her uncle shows up on our family yoga chat that was keeping us connected during the pandemic. And he said, "Do you want to come out and stay with me sometime? I've got a yurt and a wood stove. Is that okay?"
Oh my,
And I was
really?
like,
Is that
"Get in the
true?
car."
Really?
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Wow.
So we hopped in the car and we went out there. And it just so happens that he was in charge of the internet out there in the middle of the San Luis Valley in the nothingness. So he was able to send a beam right to the yurt. We didn't have plumbing, but we could get online and do our jobs from
Well,
there.
I don't know if that's the best priority, but whatever works for you, right? Whatever works.
I think my
Wow.
wife's still traumatized, but
So, so because Adventure Recovery, they have a East Coast. They started in Connecticut, and but they have a Colorado group there. So, and that's an outpatient or will day treatment, whatever. It's not residential. And
right.
are you still doing that too? Are you doing a little 360, a little Adventure Recovery, and then your coaching practice?
Correct. So, well, actually, just very recently, I'm pulling back from doing adventure recovery work. However, they're so terrific. They assure me I'm still a part of the family
Oh,
and I can jump back in whenever I like. So most of what's happening out here, because now I'm in Conifer, I'm no longer in Crestone, but Conifer is just about 20 minutes away from Red Rocks Amphitheater. So I'm in the Intermountain community. So we're nice and high up here at 8,700 feet, but it's just a quick dip down the hill, as we say, and you're in Denver proper. So I will go to clients that are out there, take them out, adventure them as much as they're willing to adventure.
hmm.
So they choose their own adventure. In some cases, we might find ourselves in the rock gym. We might find ourselves out on the rock wall in real rock. We might find ourselves hiking or in the gym lifting. I have quite a few skill sets that I can offer now. And then adventure recovery, of course, is like, what other training do you want or need? And it's just tough stopping, right?
Yeah. Well,
So
lifelong learner, you
oh yeah,
like to learn. You
I
clearly
do.
you've become a
I
yoga
do.
teacher, Buddhist teacher, or meditation teacher. You've worked in different with different populations, but there seems to be a theme of the outdoors, and which is the theme of this podcast. And so, how do you integrate the outdoor activities for men and boys and who are in different stages of change?
just about in any way that I can. As I'm sitting in this office, and what you can't see over here is this is also my gear shed. So I've got bikes hanging up here. I've got snowshoes. I've got everything that one might need to go adventure. However, meeting people where they are sometimes might be, hey, let's go stand in the dirt for a second. And I'm going to invite you to pop your shoes off and the socks. And we're going to stand here and we're going to connect to the earth for a moment. Because throughout my time working in wilderness, I might find kiddos that were really struggling at first with all the bugs and the dirt and ick. And after a little while, they would start to acclimate. And in doing so, I would ask them a question and I would say, does this feel somehow familiar? And they'd go, yeah, I don't know why. And I was like, if we look at the history of humans, we haven't been living inside for all that long. It might be actually a little bit stranger to be inside. And there's a deep knowing. And I believe Jung talked about that too. These ways that we're connected almost to the universe that we can't see and we can't explain. And that, I think, is part of why wilderness works. I think that there's a deep connection that happens there that even these kids that wanted to disagree with me at every turn couldn't deny. And a lot of them would say, this does feel a little bit like being home again. And that's so strange because I don't recognize any of this. It's like, that's true. These two things can be true at once, can't they? And I've never let go of that. I felt at home in the wilderness, even though I had no experience. And for some reason, that was where I really excelled. I did not excel in the classroom, but I excelled out there and connecting with people, which I didn't do very well in the very beginning either. I didn't understand people when I was younger. I didn't understand social contracts, and I felt very alone. But when I started to really try to study what it is that what makes us tick, I started to see people very differently. And I love people. I love our complexities and the ways that we're actually pretty simple, and that our complexities sometimes make it difficult to access that simplicity, right? Mm-hmm. So the earth, the outdoors, seems to be an invitation for simplicity, not so much distraction.
It's interesting that you share some of your Jungian philosophy. And I had a professor at CU Boulder, actually. I did my undergraduate, did some graduate work there too. And one of the professors was a Jungian scholar. And she told the story that Jung would go to his gardener to have him tell Jung what he was seeing, what were the blind spots, his shadow. So Carl Jung actually didn't go to a therapist. He went to a coach who was his gardener. At least that's
Amazing.
what she told many years ago. You can steal that story. I'll blame it back to
that's amazing.
80s. So I'm going to put that into, I could have made it up, but I'm pretty sure it's true. And interestingly enough, you've done so much. You're like a Renaissance person. And in your own journey as a wilderness instructor, mentor, coach, the different hats or titles that people have seen you as, you're a healer, clearly. Do you mind sharing just a personal story about where being outdoors was a turning point for you or a client? And I don't know how you refer to them, clients or students, or
I kind of, it's a mixed bag.
Okay, person. They just call them their name.
So many different programs. I think of so many faces all at once when I was telling you about sitting with them and asking that question of like, does this feel familiar somehow? And there are a bunch of different faces that pop into my head all at once when I think about that. And I think that's actually a really transformative moment for them, because shortly after we'd have that conversation, all of a sudden their faces would be filthy. They'd have dirt and ash all over it from working on their hard skills. It was like badge of honor dirt. And they would be rolling around and being apart in union with the earth. And then it became challenging to get them to wash their faces. That was the trick then. It's like your parents are coming. You've got to have a clean face. What are we doing?
Hmm.
But that I think was really incredible. And then watching some of the shifts that happen for these kiddos when they're eating healthier whole foods and exercising every day, and all of a sudden the depression might lift and they start to tune in. And now it's important to be a part of the community of the kiddos that are all around them, and they're checking in with each other. They deeply care about one another. And I remember a couple of the kiddos that were graduating at the same time put their street clothes back on and went to grad group together. And they were like, oh my gosh. One of them was a full gothy emo kid, and the other one was a super preppy kid. And they were like, we would have never spoken to each other
Hmm.
if we were wearing our clothes like this. And we're best friends now. These transformations that can happen when we're able to be vulnerable, when we're able to be in the wilderness, surviving together and taking care of one another, all of that stuff doesn't matter so much. And I often say, these kids taught me more than I'll ever teach them. And I was able to, through watching them grow, know that I was able to grow too. Know that I was able to take what I'd learned from them and apply it and give it away to someone else who really needed it. So that's some of when I think about being in the woods. And I'm a person with ADHD. And so there's 100 million ideas happening all at once. It's sometimes rather chaotic. But what I remember is I'd get up in the morning before any of the kiddos woke up, and I would make jasmine green tea, and I would sit by the fire and put the tiniest little sticks in there and blow them back into flame and create a little bit of heat for my hands. And then the smoke would go through the rays of the trees, the sun's rays peeking through the trees, and illuminate them. And in this moment, everything's calm. The chaos is gone. And there's going to be a whole bunch of new chaos with voices and laughter and shouting in the morning and everything. But in this moment, that peace was transformative for me. I knew it was within me that at that point, and that I could create this for myself. All I had to do was be a part of the moment in these elements. And that has been something that helped me to become a better facilitator of meditation, to actually interact with it, to be in my own body, even when things are not okay, and knowing it will be. And that's something that I can share with the families that I work with today.
Well, having so many powerful experiences in that segment of the field, as we said before, SUS of the Carolinas closed as well many years or a few years earlier. The original SUS closed. And there's been a lot of there's narratives and
Mhm.
depend sometimes it's in on podcasts, sometimes it's in newsletters or TikTok or whatever medium you consume information that really critiques and says how traumatizing wilderness therapy was for certain people, young people. And I just
Mhm.
would like your thoughts because you're really sharing it in reverence. And back
Mhm.
in the day, SUS of the Carolinas was a program that took young people by transport, and that
Mhm.
tends to be one of the big critiques. But I'd like to get your thoughts about it.
Yeah, I have quite a lot of thoughts about this, and I feel like some might be unpopular, but the
Some are
what
going to be unpopular with some people.
it's
Some are going
true.
to be popular with some people. Some
Exactly.
are going to be
And
like, oh, somewhere in the middle.
right,
This is the world we have lived in for a long time, but
it's true.
everything seems to be amplified, whether you have one political view or another political view,
Yeah.
and
It
those
makes
who
me
are in
think
the
about it a lot.
yeah.
I want to be really cautious with this because there are so many hearts that are so important, so special in this, both with the clients that we served and then also with the staff that worked there. I saw everyone work really hard in those spaces to try to in some ways become more, in some ways just to go home. And I think that while we were talking before about two things being true at once, I think wilderness can be one of the most challenging experiences anyone's ever had to go through. And I think it can also be beautiful at the same time. And for those who were not able to maybe find themselves a part of that community, some struggled with isolation from the client perspective, and even maybe from the instructor perspective sometimes. They may walk away from that experience feeling like it was all so hard that it wasn't worth it. And that kind of breaks my heart, because in some ways we weren't able to reach those folks, and you can't reach everyone. But I care deeply about everyone I've ever worked with, because they had to do something harder than I would ever have to do. And I've spent 4 and 6 months at a time on trail, but I did it by choice. I think that being able to acknowledge that the transport wasn't the best thought through plan, and that we could do better, we must do better. That's where I've positioned myself today. The attachments that can be eviscerated by the transport coming in and taking kids to wilderness, the piece that's missing, I think, for the people who have the darkest narratives is that they were not able to reattach those eviscerated attachments when they got back home. And what I think we should do today is invite people like coaches to come in and to strategize with the parents before they make a choice like that, so that we're actually giving them the tools that they need for communication, so that if their kiddo needs that level of intervention, at the very least, we can prepare them to have a better conversation than to just two strangers that show up in the middle of the night. Perhaps if it still comes to that, because I remember a story of a kid with 38 knives in his room, he might have needed some help with people who could be around weapons and not his parents to make that move. We do need to think about safety first, that lens of safety. What I think we could do differently these days is that the parents follow the transport to the program where they sit with a therapist and work on communication before their kiddo goes out into the wilderness, so that it's not just such an eviscerated attachment. And I've heard stories of some transporters going out into the field before the kiddo graduates to make amends. And I think that's so special and so valuable. If we're doing those types of things, we may actually be able to elevate the experience, where two things can be true at once. Most challenging thing you've ever done, and it's beautiful. And we don't lose that beauty in the return home. So that's where I talk about the unpopularity. That might be unpopular with having to come up with new strategies for programmatics, but it may also be very unpopular for the people who are still really hurting out there, the clients who are now grown. And it pains me to think that they're stuck and that they're not healing from that experience. And I have been working with some of the alumni that still are a part of the industry of wilderness and residential, et cetera, to try to connect with them and to see if we can encourage some kind of healing, so that they can put away this darkness and this narrative that may only be serving to keep them stuck. So I imagine that also will have some popularity and some unpopularity at the same time. But that's something I want to try to break into. I want to find a few therapists who are really skilled and sit down and hear them, hear their story. A lot of these programs like to work with Joseph Campbell and the idea of when one returns, they tell their story to their community. And in some cases, the story might be very difficult for some of us to hear. But it's a decision I made years ago when I realized, like, my kiddos are getting so much older and they're coming and they're finding me in the social media spaces. I must be willing to hear them out if ever they feel like I've harmed them or did them wrong in some way, and not to try to defend it all or to push it away. If I'm going to be who I said I was when I was in the field with them, I've got to be able to hear them.
And now they can hear you because you have a new podcast too. And I want to
Mm.
qualify what you said was really touching. And I really thank you for sharing that. And within that, I want to encourage people to listen. What is the name of your podcast?
It is the Reflective Parent Podcast.
Okay.
I'm working in the idea that maybe we could actually start with the parents at home and start teaching ways to look for patterns and cycles that aren't serving the family dynamic, interrupt them, and replace them with something else, so that we're actually doing that front end work that I talked about before. Better communication, so that if in fact we do need to take a look at some of these greater interventions, we can choose them wisely and from a place that you've already put in some time and effort and energy, so that we're not just putting all the onus on the kiddo to be the one to grow and to change. First, if mom and dad or caretakers and caregivers can show that they're willing to try to grow, that may actually help to strengthen those attachments.
And you're a non-traditional healer, meaning that you didn't get a formal training and whatnot, which I think is very attractive to a lot of boys and men because they're reluctant to engage in traditional therapy. And why do you think that is? And why do you think outdoor based coaching and mentoring is so attractive? What is it we can say that is true that they are reluctant? Why do you think they're more engaged in your type of service?
Well, I've got my little slogan. I'm a relational coach with a practical approach. And I think that
Do that
is
once
what
again
I'm.
slowly. Do that once again slowly.
Okay. I'm a relational coach with a practical approach.
That's nice.
So the idea is that wilderness taught me how to use anything that's right here with me. And then the relational aspect has been all of the attachment, working in Hakomi, the mindful somatic practices, so that we're actually dealing with what's happening right here, right now inside my body. And those things are way more tangible than me to sit here and spout off a bunch of theraspeak and to say
Theraspeak.
pathologizing
Okay.
things.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Right. Now I like to nerd out with the best of them about the nervous system and the brain, but that may not actually always be the best course of action. And what we want to do is pick up this stone that's over here, and I want you to walk with it and carry it for a while. And what do you think might be inside this stone that's inside you? Can you put it in there? And maybe it turns into, I have this deep fear of being alone. And it's like, okay, carry that for a while and think about that. Like, let's go towards this emotion and make it safe to do so that we can relate this to what's happening right now. And because we're able to do those kinds of things without trying to diagnose or trying to talk about medications or any of those kinds of things, people are kind of game. Like I said in the beginning, if we have a goal, it can be a silly little game. And then all of a sudden it's pretty serious, because guys like to do that. And usually you'll find others that'll roll their eyes at the game, but there's something deeper and more meaningful happening while we're doing something that doesn't seem all that serious. And just letting that kind of happen with being outdoors, with being in wilderness, or with just providing a different way of thinking, I think that bypasses some of the more traditional couch therapy kind of thing. And I'm hearing this from the parents too. As we're working together, they're like, we've gone to see all of these therapists and it's always the same, but this is different somehow. More often than not, I like to think that it's because I'm really trying to see them and connect with the emotions that they're experiencing, acknowledge them, and not be afraid to go towards what Pema Chodron calls sitting in the yuck. Like, I love it when a parent comes to me and says, I don't think this is going to work, and I think you're full of it. And then I can be like, okay, great. So it sounds like there's some resistance here. Let's be with that. That's okay. It's okay if that's here. And maybe today, all we do is sit in that. We don't have to go try to fix everything, and we don't have to try to become best buddies. That's not what we're here for, but what is actually present. So I think in some ways I get to sneak in the back door with that. I have a friend who, and mentor, who at one time said to me, people have a room that they build for themselves. It's inside their mind, and they sometimes will build a door and open it up to people who are coming in to try to help them. And you have this tendency to just show up in the room. And I always imagine myself going, this is a weird sort of place, isn't it? And people being like, oh no, how did you get in here? And that was a warning of his. He was like, this tends to be something that you do well. And it will probably, sorry, and it will probably, this is something that you do really well, and it will probably shock people, and it might create barriers to you being able to work with them. It was an acknowledgement that what we do is so powerful, and I must be humble about the spaces that I'm allowed to go into, and I've got to be really careful that I don't just show up there. And I think that remembering to do that may also help people to sense that there's something there that keeps them protected. And as long as I'm remembering to do it, I'm doing that. I'm trying to help to protect the space so we can hold this container. And what does actually come up can be presence instead of trying to force anything or trying to push anything away.
Beautiful. Jason Denham, why don't you share with people how they can get in touch with you?
Okay. I've got a couple of different ways to do this. Let's see if I can do it without stumbling too much. So www.awakenshadow.com, and that's awakened like the past tense, is how you can find more about me and the services that I offer as I do one-on-one parent coaching. I will work with people who are in the recovery space, either seeking recovery or in long-term recovery. I also work with an increasing number of young adults emerging into the collegiate spaces. So walking side by side with the young adults going to college. And I've started a parenting community space called the Reflective Parent Support Group. It is on Community, and then you will be able to find your way there via the website. You can find me in all the social media spaces, the Attachment Coach, and that's on Instagram, and then in Facebook as Awaken Shadow Coaching. And I'm working on building out a way for us to be a neighborhood community, the countrywide. And I want to hear what parents have to say so that we can build what it is that they really need, what they want, and not to just guess.
Jason, thank you so much for sharing your story on Stories from the Field.
Thanks, Will.